So let's talk a little bit about alchemy and the connections before I jump to those pictures or the diagrams of the Red Pyramid. So through this experience at Abu Sir and in the Red Pyramid, I immediately began to think that the pyramids were designed to produce chemicals. And that theory really resonated with me because I knew that Egypt was the birthplace of chemistry. The Egyptians were masters of this science. And it made a lot more sense to me that they were using these for chemistry and practical applications. Again, infrastructure projects that would have benefited the civilization. It would have improved the agriculture. It would have improved their ability to perform industrial applications. Again, the metallurgy, mining, etc. So I got home and I started investigating the connections between alchemy and the pyramids, or chemistry in the pyramids. So when we were at Giza, I learned that and you can also see here from this picture, and I have a few other pictures as well that I'll share, that there is chemical staining covering the walls of these chambers, particularly in the upper portion of the chamber. There's two different types of staining. There's this very nebulous condensed staining in the top portion of the chamber. And then you have this runny drip type staining in the lower portion of the chamber. And I can get into an explanation of why that is the case in later videos. Again, I won't spoil the surprise. Yeah. But these structures were absolutely functional. And there's a very specific reason for the transition between the two types of staining. So this picture is of the second chamber in the Red Pyramid. And you can really see the dark staining in the upper portion of the chamber, the staining all along the vaults, and the staining begins precisely at the third tier. And we're live, man.
Okay, hello, this is Alan from the SGD channel, and today I have the pleasure of introducing Geoffrey Drumm and his book and website, The Land of Chem. Before I begin, if you're familiar with my channel, I've been interested in many aspects, modern history going back to ancient history, especially what would often be described as the esoteric. But I tend to focus on the geometry and trying to keep it more grounded, and especially the sciences. And so for a while now, I've been interested in the development of, now the word alchemy tends to have negative connotations, the sort of Harry Potter, Hollywood influences really come into it. But upon studying it, I've seen that especially the development of chemistry, as in alchemy, and has led to the word chemistry, and especially the metallurgical aspects as they apply. People such as Basil Valentine, Stephan Michelspacher, even up to famous Isaac Newton were alchemists, but their alchemy was very strongly in the sciences where they were developing, well, as we would call it now, chemistry, and especially with metallurgy. These applications also led into early medicine. What's usually described as the corpus hermetica as well has very strong scientific aspects, where we see, again, I would say especially metallurgy and the very hard chemistry and sciences being so important in the development of human history. But unfortunately, these esoteric groups and individuals have been popularized by Hollywood into much more, lightning from the hands, Jedi type of stuff, rather than the solid application of these knowledge. And so Geoffrey will be talking about the pyramids in Egypt. And before we intro that, I think it's an important point in regards to the development of civilizations and how they're separated from cultures, is the fact that, well, a civilization is one of the key factors would be taxation, standard weights and measurement, a more developed economy, a system of law, but especially given the size of Egypt, and the amount of copper, for instance, that they were mining, the amount and the quality of the gold that they were producing, as well as you might tie that into Sumer, where we see these early civilizations and especially early writings where the focus of the writing tended to be on economic issues, issues of law, and spreadsheets, as we could say. So very boring stuff for most people, but it's so important to the development of civilization. Around about 3 years ago, Geoffrey contacted me and proposed to show me his ideas after traveling to Egypt. He noticed some very curious anomalies, architectural features which I hadn't seen, and even since that time I've been trying to pay attention to those who visit and film, for instance, the area around the pyramids, and I still really haven't seen these curious features being brought up or even noticed. And that's one of the things I was very impressed with his original presentation, and now has what he's going to show you tonight. I'm sure he'll tell you a lot more about it, but just a brief overview. He's been developing this for a number of years. He's spoken to some people who are knowledgeable, have experience in the field, and as the name suggests, the land of chem. So whether it's alchemy or chemistry, or even I'm sure he'll give you a rundown of that, but even, for instance, chemet and the origins of these words are actually multiple levels of interpretation of this, but I think the important feature to focus on is the more tangible areas. Now, for those familiar with my channel, I tend to be, although I'm quite alternative, I also tend to be quite conservative and skeptical, you might say. I don't particularly like that word. I think skepticism has been, the true meaning of skepticism has been robbed a little bit, because a skeptic should be skeptical of both the orthodox and the alternative. I don't think skepticism is a one-way road. And so, although his ideas might vary from what you might be familiar with mine, it's good to keep an open mind and have these ideas presented and to be tested. And that's what I think is another important feature of what Geoff will be saying. His ideas are things that can be tested. These are known sciences, known chemical applications that it's a solid idea. We won't be relying on any sort of unknown, untested, mystical science that we know we need to fill gaps. I think that's what's very impressive to me in that regard, is the fact that this is a hypothesis that also has a null hypothesis, as they call it, where we can, any theory should have a concept of a framework in which you can disprove it and in which you can prove it. And I think this is very important, because it's something that you can get your teeth into and you can say, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't work. Although I'm familiar with this material, Geoff has developed this along the way, so I'm looking forward to a lot of his new discoveries and updated research. This will be just an introduction, so we won't be going into depth into every little piece here. In follow-up and in his follow-up works, he will be presenting more information. At this point, I would like to introduce Geoffrey Drumm and just have his opening comments and have him lay out the basics of his idea and how he come to them and where he is now. And so, Geoffrey, please introduce yourself.
Alan, thank you so much for the introduction. I know this has been a long time in the works. We've been talking for the past 3 years, and when I began to develop the ideas for this book, I reached out to you to show you the presentation because I knew that you were well acquainted with the structures, well acquainted with Egyptian chemistry, and you would give me some legitimate feedback and criticism as to the validity of the ideas that I had come up with. And as you mentioned, I also worked with a PhD in chemical engineering to validate the technical details that I have included in the book. So what is the Land of Chem, and what is this all about? So it's a 59-page novella about a young man's introduction into an ancient society that was responsible for the construction and operation of the Egyptian pyramids. And they were the ones who built the structures. They were the ones who were using the structures. And this young man is being initiated into this society. And in the process, he learns the true purpose of the Egyptian pyramids. So the book contains theories about exactly how these structures operated and what they were producing. So today we're clearly going to be talking about the connection between the Egyptian pyramids and chemistry. So without further ado, I am going to start this presentation, and we'll wrap up with a little video outro here in just a little bit. Alan, thank you again. This means the world to me. It's been a long time in the making. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be doing this on your channel, and I just really appreciate it. Please bear with me. This is my first time in a video interview. I'm very, very excited and a little bit nervous, but such is the nature of all great undertakings, I suppose. So without
well, this is the time I've interviewed someone, so yeah, be gentle with me as well. So
right. So let's jump into this, and we'll go from there. All right. So this is just the logo, and the title of the book is The Land of Chem, CHEM. So the logo is a 45-45-90 triangle, which represents the red pyramid. And anyone who's familiar with chemistry and molecules will immediately know what these two molecules here are in the center. I won't spoil the surprise, as we'll get to that in later videos. But again, in my opinion, this is the greatest secret of all time. And there are many theories out there about the Egyptian pyramids, but the truth about these structures is much more compelling. It's much more realistic, and it's a wonderful story that really needs to be told. So the website, for those of you that are interested, is www.thelandofchem.com. The book is available for digital download right now. I also have some cool t-shirts that are available, and you can also follow me on Instagram at thelandofchem.com. So as kind of a general introduction to the time frame of reference in the book, there's lots of legitimate research right now about the end of the last ice age, particularly with guys like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. They're researching the ancient civilization that possibly existed in North America. And I do believe that to be the case, that there was an ancient civilization around 10,000 BC. And during the catastrophe that ended the last ice age, there were refugees that fled from this civilization, and they were the ones that brought the knowledge into Europe, Africa, South America, and even into Asia. And in all of these different countries, you have these myths of the arrival of the creator gods that brought this technology to their civilization already intact. We have those stories in Sumer, how their gods arrived with the technology and the science. Same thing in South America and also in Japan. So there really is some historical evidence that there was a civilization that predated these ancient civilizations. Specifically, the time frame that I use in the book is approximately 7,000 BC. So I didn't know this until I started researching it, but there was a time period in the Sahara where there was actually plentiful rainfall. So prior to 8,500 BC, the Sahara was a complete desert. You had some limited developments and populations that were right along the Nile River. And then around 8,500 BC, the Sahara became transformed by monsoon rains into this lush, fertile environment. And you would have had significantly more arable farmland. So all of this area would have been farmable land. There's evidence of the domestication of cattle, which directly ties into the operation of the step pyramid. And there would have been plentiful water, which is also essential in the operation of the pyramids. And then by the time...
If I just interrupt you for a moment, for those who I have some understanding of this presentation and where you're going, but if just for the viewers at home, could I ask you in a few sentences if you could lay out especially in regards to the pyramids, the basic concept which you've described to me as well. So if, especially in regards to all of those major pyramids coming together, rather than focusing on the Great Pyramid, for instance, individually. If you could just put that into a short description of
Sure.
that for those who, yeah.
So all of the alternative theories about the pyramids focus specifically on the Great Pyramid, that it was a structure for production of electricity, or this magical sound resonance chamber. And all of those are just buzzwords that don't really mean anything. They're clickbait, and they aren't based on actual science or research. So when you visit Egypt, all of these pyramids are evidently connected. When you start at the step pyramid, when you look at the horizon, you can see the next pyramid in the distance. And from the red pyramid, you can see the bent pyramid. And as you move up, you keep seeing the next structure on the horizon. So these were not isolated structures. And to look at just one of them specifically is not looking at the bigger picture for what these things were actually used for. So that's what I try to paint in the book, is kind of a comprehensive overview of all of the structures. And in the book, I cover the operation of the step pyramid, the red pyramid, the bent pyramid, the Great Pyramid, and the Middle Pyramid of Giza. And I don't refer to these structures by their pharaonic names because I don't think that they were burial chambers. Of course, I do believe that as the dynastic Egyptians settled, they repurposed these structures, and they would have done reconstructions or renovations or whatever it might be. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we look at the step pyramid specifically. But again, these structures were connected not only in their function, but also in their ties on the landscape. So
if I could run down from after having read what you sent me. So basically the essential concept is that the major pyramids such as the step pyramid, red pyramid, bent pyramid, up to moving north towards the three famous pyramids, that they had an industrial, that firstly that they weren't individual, that they were connected in an industrial purpose. That would be fair enough summation.
Correct.
And that those purposes is essentially a chemical application, beginning with some very simple, what we would almost think of now as high school chemistry. So really beginning with methane gas production, and then moving through to ammonia, and up until the final stages leading to sulfuric and hydrochloric acid, which again are not very, so for those unfamiliar, for sulfuric and hydrochloric acid are just pretty much the basic building blocks of much of our industrial world. Yet they're very, in a chemistry sense, quite primitive. For instance, the sulfuric acid is quite easy to make. It's pretty much sulfur. And even the famous alchemists, such as Basil Valentine, is often given credit for discovering hydrochloric acid in about the 12th century. But to create hydrochloric acid, all you do is you pour sulfuric acid on salt, and then you can capture that, and that's for it. So what you just to give it a rundown for the viewers, that we're not going to be talking about super complicated chemical applications.
Correct.
Hydrochloric and sulfuric acid, which are, some of the, actually some of it, as you mentioned in our discussion earlier, it's really chemistry 101. But those applications and the steps running through, and even the byproducts, would have applications and be very helpful in metallurgy, but also in agriculture.
Right. So these pyramids were developed to support the agriculture and industrial needs of the pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization. So any civilization that can organize the construction of these caliber of monuments, they would have had architecture, they would have had engineering, they would have had a thorough understanding of physics and also of chemistry. And we know that Egypt was the birthplace of chemistry. And again, I don't believe that ancient civilizations would have wasted all of these resources to construct these monuments as burial structures. They would have had a function, like we mentioned earlier with the Roman aqueducts. It was an infrastructure project designed to support the needs of the population and the civilization. So these were functional structures that were used for agriculture and industrial support, eventually into metallurgy, mining, extraction, and separation of metals. So they definitely had a specific purpose. And again, I think looking at the comprehensive overall picture paints a more thorough picture of what these structures were actually used for. So a little bit of background behind the name of the book. The full title is The Land of Chem, an initiation into ancient chemistry through the degrees of the Egyptian pyramids. And again, it's a fictional story about this young man's initiation into the ancient society. But within that narrative, there is a thorough explanation of how each one of these structures operates. And the name, the Land of Chem, is just a play on words from the original name of Egypt, which was Khem. So we know that the modern word for chemistry was derived from the word alchemy, which was derived from the word chem, Khem, which meant blackness. And the technical definition for chem refers to the alluvial soil around the Nile River, this very rich, dark soil that the Egyptians, basically their civilization depended on the flooding of the Nile River, and it was the lifeblood of the Egyptian civilization. But you and I both know, or anybody that's familiar with the alchemical process, there is the stage of calcification, which was the burning of your raw materials or plant material to extract the volatile salts. And again, like you said, I think chemistry, or alchemy rather, it gets a bad rap, and I don't particularly like that name because it has all these spiritual aspects to it. And the practitioners of chemistry during the medieval period used the word alchemy as a guise or a veil to hide the science that they were practicing, because it was very much a persecuted process and you would have been burned at the stake for practicing science or chemistry. So they hid it under this spiritual process and these very, kind of vague terms instead of using the specific chemistry that they were referring to. So again, the name of the book is just a play on words that, again, derives from the ancient origins of chemistry being from Egypt.
And for those unfamiliar, so you'll often see in demonstration, especially in the movies type of stuff, you'll see these alchemical imagery, which is, as Jeff pointed out, quite veiled. Even the early Hermeticists, Neoplatonists, made no secret of pointing out that they used a hidden language in to describe these things. There's down in Panopolis, during the Greek period, there was a famous alchemist, Zosimos, but there's also a famous Leiden papyrus, which is about 1500 BC, but actually is a copy of an older. And well, famously down there was a temple where they actually warned the people not to engage in what they called magic, because the wording that they would use to describe certain chemicals, such as sulfuric acid, was called, for instance, Isaac Newton and his period, and even going back, was called oil of vitriol. But there were many vague terms like very common herbs and common chemicals had very curious names, crocodile blood, lion hearts, and that people in ancient times would actually take these literally and try to apply this magic, as they called it. And there are a few cases in the Greek world where they actually gave it and told the people, you know, do not take this literally. You know, it's a language. I think that your logo there, now we have, same as in maths, but in chemistry, we have a notation, a language for when we write chemistry and write it out. But this was not the case in earlier periods. And so I think that's one of the things that's been lost with ancient texts. People tend to read them in a literal sense, but the words have hidden meanings.
Right.
Also, at the time, they didn't have the common language for whether it was mathematics, chemistry, or physics. All those equations and notations we take for granted now are pretty much modern inventions. But back in the day, the plus or the minus sign that we use universally now didn't have that same meaning between, not only between neighboring cultures, but even within a single culture. Yeah, the language of science is, you know, when people say an equals MC squared being a classic case, that's now universally accepted language. But back in the time, it was deliberately hidden, but also we just hadn't developed a common language in that sense as well. So I think maybe just to interject for a moment, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, not at all. You actually brought up a good point in terms of, imagine you're an ancient lay person and you see someone performing a chemical reaction. To the uninitiated, or to those who didn't understand what the science was, it would have appeared to be magic. You know, the color changes, the spectacular reactions that can be produced using chemistry. For somebody who didn't know what that was, you would have been a magician, and it was very much sort of a forbidden practice and viewed as such. So that was a very good point. And I think that in some of the ancient texts, and you hear this reference to magic, but I do believe that was actually just chemistry, and it was people practicing this science under the veil of alchemy or magic or whatever it might have been. So that was just a great vacation picture of me standing on a camel in front of the Giza pyramids. So to give you an idea of kind of where this whole idea came up with, the first site that we went to, so again, when I went to Egypt, I went very much to research the pyramids. At the time, I was very much entertaining these alternative theories about the Great Pyramid, you know, being electrical production structure, and I really wanted to investigate more. So I had a very specific kind of research itinerary planned for the trip. But the first day that we got there, our guide took us to a site called Abu Sir. And this is a very popular site with the ancient lost high technology group, because there's some things here that everybody talks about. But in my opinion, that's the least important stuff that's at the site. And we'll get into some of that. So this is just to give you an idea of what the place looks like. You know, there's this temple that is adjacent to these very small pyramids. And it's all pretty much in ruins. There's not very much to see here. And when most folks go here, particularly the Brian Forrester, you know, ancient machine tools type guys, this is all they focus on. And I know you've seen this picture before, you've seen this stone before, and everybody talks about this stone, which again could be accomplished using pretty basic masonry. It's, again, there's no high technology involved. It's very, very rudimentary technology, but everybody focuses just on this. And our guide, he knew I wasn't so compelled by this particular stone. And so I'm looking around and trying to find different stuff. And he said, hey, go check at the end of the temple. So I walk over to the end of this temple, and I found this, half buried in the sand. And so this is a granite conduit that leads under the floor of the temple. And our guide said that the conduit is connected into the pyramid. So first of all, if these pyramids were burial structures, why is there a conduit leading from inside the pyramid into this collection bowl? So you would have had something running through the conduit and being collected in the receptacle here at the bottom. So first of all, that doesn't correspond with the burial chamber theory. And it also doesn't really correspond with any sort of electrical production or sound resonance chambers. They were producing something and they were collecting something from inside the pyramids. So as soon as I saw this, my wheels were already turning. And again, I was very excited to see this because I don't think there's any researchers out there that talk about this. I have never seen this picture before. In all of the presentations about Abu Sir, everybody focuses on the stone cutting, but this is what's really important here. So I just wanted to share that with you because this was the first piece of evidence that I found that indicated that there was a collection process, and the collection process implies a production. So you're producing something and you got to collect it. So this is really the first kind of piece of evidence that I found.
I'll just point out, especially stones such as granite. Well, they are. It would be quite a good material for. So even like acid does affect granite, but it really is a slow process to go with, and I think sulfuric and hydrochloric acid wouldn't be much more corrosive than salt water on granite, even over a long time. So the use of those stones would be especially given the lack of more modern, let's call it, materials, that would probably be a good choice of materials in that sense. But
right, and you've talked in some of your previous videos. I won't spoil the secret, but they would have protected the integrity of the stones used in the process. And there's a way to do that that's pretty straightforward that the Egyptians would have absolutely been capable of. So
I would guess.
Well, you know what it is. You read the book, and you've mentioned it sort of just as an offhand comment in some of your videos before. So we've always kind of been on the same page about that. So the next structure that we got to go into is the Red Pyramid. And in my opinion, this is the smoking gun, the nail in the coffin for not only the burial chamber theory, but also for any sort of sound resonance or any other alternative theory about the pyramids. And no one ever talks about this structure. So as soon as you go into the Red Pyramid, you descend down the stairway through the shaft, you get into this first chamber, and there is just an overwhelming smell of ammonia. It is intense, and it is very distinctly chemical ammonia. You could pull a gallon of ammonia out from your kitchen cupboard, and that's exactly what it smells like in this pyramid. And you can also see here from this picture, and I have a few other pictures as well that I'll share, that there is chemical staining covering the walls of these chambers, particularly in the upper portion of the chamber. There's two different types of staining. There's this very nebulous condensed staining in the top portion of the chamber, and then you have this runny drip type staining in the lower portion of the chamber. And I can get into an explanation of why that is the case in later videos. Again, I won't spoil the surprise.
Yeah.
But these structures were absolutely functional, and there's a very specific reason for the transition between the two types of staining. So this picture is of the second chamber in the Red Pyramid, and you can really see the dark staining in the upper portion of the chamber, the staining all along the vaults, and the staining begins precisely at the third tier.
Could I ask you just to skip, just briefly, if we could skip forward to the diagram of the Red Pyramid, just so that people watching would get an idea of, because looking at it, they might think we're talking about the same, that we're in the same room. I know you have that slide.
Right.
Just we could have a quick view at the internal structures, just to get a basic idea.
Absolutely. And so the staining is It's comparable in all three chambers. So this first picture on the right here is one of my favorites. This is an old photo from the Red Pyramid. And this picture is from the first chamber, and you can really see the staining pattern that looks like it's flowing into the second chamber. And again, the staining on the chambers is indication of flow dynamics, which were involved in the operation of the structure. This picture on the left is a picture from the third chamber. And again, you can see this dark nebulous staining in the top portion of the chamber and how it kind of runs down the sides towards the lower portion of the chamber. So let's talk a little bit about alchemy and the connections before I jump to those pictures or the diagrams of the Red Pyramid. So through this experience at Abu Sir and in the Red Pyramid, I immediately began to think that the pyramids were designed to produce chemicals. And that theory really resonated with me because I knew that Egypt was the birthplace of chemistry. The Egyptians were masters of this science. And it made a lot more sense to me that they were using these for chemistry and practical applications. Again, infrastructure projects that would have benefited the civilization. It would have improved the agriculture. It would have improved their ability to perform industrial applications. Again, the metallurgy, mining, etc. So I got home and I started investigating the connections between alchemy and the pyramids, or chemistry in the pyramids. So when we were at Giza, I learned that the Great Pyramid and the pyramids of Giza were color-coded. The Great Pyramid had a white limestone casing. The Middle Pyramid had a red granite casing, and it actually had a white limestone peak. And the third smallest pyramid was cased in black basalt. And I immediately remembered that there was a direct connection between these three colors and alchemy. Red, black, white, and red were very much used to depict stages of the alchemical process, which was actually a process of chemical extraction. So you have your negredo, the albedo, and the rubedo. So as I began to investigate the connections between the pyramids and chemistry, I began to find more and more similarities and correspondences, which I believe were universal indications that I was on the right track. And as I began to kind of pull at the string, the mystery began to unravel, and I kept finding more and more things that indicated that these structures were actually directly tied to chemistry.
If I could just insert, so we see the previous one where we saw the black with putrefaction. Even if you see in the typical alchemical text, there were 7 steps: distillation, calcination, basically the same operations we still use in chemistry today. When most people would hear the word putrefaction, they would tend to think of decaying bodies, but the step of putrefaction was along with, coagulation. So people would think blood coagulates, but that was coagulation is used, for instance, in cheese making, and that putrefaction is like one of the steps of chemistry. That would be a better term, and that these. So for those who maybe are watching and would look at this and sort of think of it more in a spiritual sort of sense, but putrefaction is one of the steps of alchemy. So along with what people would be familiar with distillation, but or coagulation, but these actually have laboratory meanings, and that they're still used in the lab today. Sorry, Brian.
Correct. Yep. So the putrefaction stage really refers to chemical decomposition of material. So it's the breakdown of your organic material in order to extract the material that you're looking for. So as I began to investigate these alchemical drawings, I kept seeing these chambers as a recurring theme and structures as a recurring theme. So again, as I started looking into this, I began to find more and more correspondences, and we'll get to that in a later video in terms of what these chambers are representing. But I kept finding them in all of these alchemical drawings. And you'll see here in these two drawings that they're these mound structures, and the alchemy is being performed inside these mounds. And I talk about that when I get to the structures that we found in Ireland. That's the final chapter of the book. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, right. Where you can see there are actually 7 steps, and you have like a calcination,
Correct.
putrefaction, and there along. Yeah, I'm familiar with that one as well. So yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. So again, when I was looking at this particular one, it just reminded me of the step pyramid. You know how you have this tiered mountain, and again, the alchemy is being performed inside the structure. So I just thought these were interesting correspondences, and it gave me an indication that I was kind of on the right track, and I was interested in continuing to research it. So then I started to specifically dig into the red pyramid and the current process for the industrial manufacture of ammonia. And you'll see here in the red pyramid, there's 3 chambers, and they're all geometrically similar. So from the north, you go down the shaft leading into the first chamber. You have 2 chambers at ground level that are connected by a shaft. And then you have this third elevated chamber that has a giant pit in the bottom of it. So again, the red pyramid reeks of ammonia. There's all of this chemical staining on the inside. So I started looking into the origins of the production of industrial scale ammonia. And I stumbled across this, which was the original apparatus that was designed to produce ammonia. And this is where our current industrial process for ammonia production, it was derived. And you'll see here that there's 3 chambers. You have your tube leading in. You have your 2 chambers that are at a level with connection between them. And then you have this third and final chamber that was elevated above the other 2. And it immediately struck me that there's a really strong correspondence between the design of this apparatus and the design of the red pyramid. And the guy who made this, he could have built this in any sort of fashion, in any sort of configuration. But I believe it was intentionally an homage to the place from whence it came. Again, to pay tribute to the red pyramid and the fact that the Egyptians were using that structure to produce ammonia. So again, you'll see in this one, there's the tube leading into the first chamber. You have a connection between the first and second chambers, and then this elevated third final synthesis chamber. And here are the 2 things put side by side. Again, you have your shaft leading into the first chamber. Your first chamber is connected to the second chamber. And then you have your third and final synthesis chamber here, which was elevated above the other 2. So when I saw these 2 things compared next to each other, I was like, man, holy shit. I was really onto something. And this gave me the encouragement to continue looking into these structures. And this is kind of the last slide I have for this particular presentation, but to give the viewers an idea of how these structures operated. These chambers, yeah, go ahead before I get into it.
Well, so even though that apparatus there is more on the elaborate side, but it's the type of thing like you would be able to put together in a high school chemistry class, in that even the image and those dials might make it look a little bit more complicated than what it necessarily needs to be. And also, I think it's something we discussed way back when, but a lot of those people who patented these chemical processes, back in the 1700s, 1800s type of period, that they had, they're only 1 or 2 degrees away from, let's just say, more esoteric organisations like Rosicrucians, or I'll just put it under the umbrella of the Hermetic influence in regards to the develop. So even what we call alchemy, there's a line in history, and prior to that, alchemy all of a sudden become chemistry through the Royal Society. But there is this grey period between the more esoteric alchemical world and the more modern strict science of the Royal Society, for instance. And that there is I think that's an interesting, the individuals who developed these were not separated from the century that come before them, where it was much more, let's just use the word occult, as in hidden, rather than the more sort of diabolical applications of that type of word. Yeah.
So there's a direct chain that originated in Egypt. It followed into the later Greek and Roman civilizations, into medieval Europe, and then into the modern day. It was the same practitioners and the same knowledge that originated in Egypt, and it was developed and practiced in secrecy until we came to the modern day, and it became actual chemistry. And the science that was used in the operation of the Egyptian pyramids is very much physics and chemistry 101. It is very, very basic principles that were used to accomplish, in my opinion, it's miraculous chemistry. It was amazing what they were able to produce using these basic techniques. And unfortunately, it gets the label of high technology when it's actually the exact opposite. If anything, it's very low tech. Was it technology? Absolutely. But again, using those buzzwords is a disservice to the intelligence of those who built these structures. And to give the folks a preview as to how these structures operated, they were designed to manipulate the temperature and pressure of water insoluble gases by manipulating the volume of those gases. And you'll see here that the chambers of the Red Pyramid have reduced volume towards the top of the upper vault. And
yes,
water was used to compress these water insoluble gases into the upper portion of the chamber. And as you reduce the volume, you're going to increase the temperature and pressure of those gases to facilitate a chemical reaction. So it was very, very basic physics, very basic knowledge of simple chemical reactions. And I'm not implying that these reactions occurred at the rate or the efficiency of what we currently have, but they were still happening, and they were still able to achieve this chemical transformation to retrieve a product that would have benefited their civilization. Again, these are practical structures that were industrial applications designed to support the agriculture and industry of pre-dynastic Egypt. So Alan, that was it for kind of this little intro presentation. I just want to say thank you again, man. It's a lot of fun to do this with you. I very much look forward to working on more in-depth projects, because again, in the book, I do give an explanation for the Step Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, the Great Pyramid, the Middle Pyramid of Giza, and then also the ancient passage chamber mounds of Ireland, which were also used for chemistry. So I very much look forward to diving into greater depth in the future. And Alan, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. It means a lot, and it's an honor and a pleasure, sir.
Well, thank you very much. same right back at you. Thank you for firstly for introducing me and sharing and being willing to share. I understand how these things go, because it's not easy to share these ideas, especially if it's a new idea. You can be, I myself was very intimidated to begin with, but so yeah, I'm very grateful that firstly you shared it with me, that you give me this opportunity to now share it with other people. And again, having spoken with you before and read the book, there is a lot more to this than what we've seen here. So it's
Right.
but even then, you're not going to be asking us to take a leap of faith into some undiscovered, unknown technology. It is grounded in very practical and very well established concepts. And I think, yeah, so before maybe people jump to, leap to judgment or whatever, there is, you have a lot more to come in these regards and in this regard. And what you've shown me is, I think the importance of it is that it can be tested, and we can look into these things, and not really asking people to rely on, again, the undiscovered country, so to speak. It's and even the known chemical traces that we find in artifacts are essentially telling us the same story in regards to, sulfuric acid. These things are not, as oil of vitriol as it was called, these things do go back into the earliest recorded history, and their usage in things such as reduction of glass would be another aspect, glazing for ceramics. But of course, there's also a military industrial application to these, which would also not too much different from today, where the secrecy in regards to these things is just as true probably back then as it certainly is now. And metallurgy and chemistry, especially at the cutting edge, if you think nuclear physics, weapon production, still now it's that cutting edge of physics and chemistry is very important feature. And I don't think if you're running a country now, or if you're doing it thousands of years ago, you don't want to be letting out your secrets willy-nilly, especially to any potential competitors on the economic or military front.
So, in my opinion, if they were able to build these structures, they would have been able to apply their knowledge of physics and chemistry within them to be able to transform them into functional machines. Again, ancient civilizations wouldn't have wasted the resources in building monuments for burials, when it would have been much more practical to use these for agriculture or industrial purposes. So again, there's much more to come in further videos and further presentations. For anybody who's interested in reading the book, it's The Land of Chem. The website is www.thelandofchem.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram at thelandofchem.com. Alan, thank you so much for doing this. I look forward to our next meeting. And for the viewers, there's going to be a lot more coming down the line.
Excellent. I'll be sure to put these links in the description as well. And again, I'm presenting this through my channel, but I am not the person to be asking the questions. I think, so definitely follow his links. And I assume that you'd be open to sort of questions or dialogue with any other people who might be interested.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely. So my intention with writing this book was to put these ideas out there so that they can actually be tested. Someone that has the software, CAD type applications, there's ways to model this theory using our technology now. And I hope to be able to put this in the hands of someone who is more capable than myself, in terms of somebody that has access to this type of software. So again, my whole idea in writing this book was just to paint the picture and really tell the story of what these structures were used for, how they applied to ancient life, and again, just to introduce the concept, because again, there's so much misinformation out there about the pyramids and these unsubstantiated speculations about their true purpose, when if you really look into it and look at the evidence, there's more evidence to support this theory and the connection of the pyramids to chemistry than there is anything else out there. Again, the explanations I've heard for the staining in the red pyramid, just, they don't make sense. And you really have to look at what's directly in front of you and be open enough to receiving that and interpreting it. And again, I just happened to stumble across these correspondences, and we'll get into this in later videos, but the more I began to look into it, the more connections and the more evidence became apparent.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to share this, and please do follow and visit the website and have a look in and investigate a little bit further for yourself. The best thing you can do is investigate and test and keep open to new ideas. And yeah, I think it's just, if it can be tested, and it can be, it has validity to it, and it does, and he's not asking us to believe in anything that's not really rock solid sort of science already. Now we just have to be, keep an open mind and look and apply this. And yeah, well, all I can say is congratulations for for doing the work and sticking. And again, you have spoken to other people, so there is definitely something to this, and something that we can hopefully investigate more. And as it goes with these new ideas, it always begins, everything begins with rough, and then eventually we polish it down and we get a diamond. So more power to you, and let's see how this goes.
Excellent, Alan. Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
No worries, man. Have a good one. Cheers from Australia.
Cheers.